Welcome to the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Rosensweet, mom of 3 young people, peaceful parenting coach, and your cheerleader and guide on all things parenting. Each week, we'll cover the tools, strategies, and support you need to end the yelling and power struggles and encourage your kids to listen and cooperate so that you can enjoy your family time. I'm happy to say we have a great relationship with our 3 kids. The teen years have been easy and joyful, not because we're special unicorns, but because my kids were raised with peaceful parenting. I've also helped so many parents just like you stop struggling and enjoy their kids again. I'm excited to be here with you today and bring you the insight and information you need to make your parenting journey a little more peaceful. Let's dive into this week's conversation. Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. Today's episode is a coaching episode. You will meet Bob, who is the father of Cody, who's 6, and Skyler, who's 2. And we really spent most of our time talking about the challenges that come with parenting a kid who is what I call more or extra. Cody is a kid with really big feelings and a lot of sensitivity. And we talked about the challenges that brought up for Bob in himself and his fears and his challenge with staying calm and emotionally generous with Cody when he was having really big feelings. This episode is a really great example of how we need to really keep our eyes on the long game in supporting a child who has big needs. And, it's one of those times where one coaching call is not going to solve all of our problems, but can really set us up for really preparing for how are we going to stay with this? How are we going to stay on course when we do have a kid who is more challenging or extra challenging than the average child? And of course, that doesn't mean they're not wonderful and amazing, but there are some kids who are just more challenging to parent. And that's just the bottom line. We can be doing everything, quote, right, and it can still be hard. Not to say that there aren't things that we can do to make it easier. And I think you'll hear that we had some good suggestions for Bob and that he was able to put some of those things into play. And so stick around to the end and you'll get an update on how things worked out for him. And we also dove into something else in our check-in at the end about leading with empathy that he felt he was missing, that I think is really, really important when we are parenting kids with big feelings. So to all of you with those kids who are more or extra, hang in there. You can do this. We've got you. And just a quick note before we meet Bob, I am happy to say that I am once again accepting new clients. I have had to turn people away for the past few months just because I had 0 room in my calendar, but my calendar is starting to open up again. So if you are interested in coaching, in one-on-one coaching with me, you can head to my website, sarahrosensweet.com, and there on the homepage, you will find a button that says book a call, and you can book either a coaching call or a short free consult with me. I'd be happy to speak with you and see if we would like to work together, if you would like to get coaching and help you with your extra or challenging kids or whatever else is going on with you. Okay, let's meet Bob. Hi, Bob. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
So I'm so glad to have a dad on. I was just telling you before we came on this call that we've had a lot of moms on. So it's really important to me to also have the dad voices on because dads are just as important as moms in kids' lives. And I really appreciate you coming on. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Introduce yourself.
Sure. My name's Bob. I live in Washington State, and my wife and I, we have 2 young kiddos. One who's 2, almost 2, his name's Skyler, and one who's about 6.5, and his name's Cody.
Okay, great. So how can I support you today? Tell me a little bit about the challenges that you're experiencing.
Yeah, right. Well, I was excited about the opportunity to chat with a parenting coach about challenges because there are many. And my wife and I wrestle with a lot of things, and we're always trying to get it right, and it's nice to have support. So this seemed like a great opportunity for that. And in trying to kind of narrow down what that support might look like, I guess if I were to hone in on one particular thing with the 6-year-old, it's really trying to show up, and interact with empathy first, connect before correct, as Dr. Markham would say. And that's really been the biggest challenge with him. He's a sensitive kiddo. There's been a lot of upsets these days. It seems like, ever since Skyler was born, it's been a big adjustment, still is 2 years later. Sharing time with mom and dad. And one of the big stressors or challenges in our lives is lack of free time in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm.
And I work full time, and my wife is engaging in a course to trying to get into a nursing program. And so she studies a lot. And they're just, Cody had mom all to himself for a couple of years at least, maybe almost 4 actually, before she started doing other things. And so I think it's been a big adjustment for him. So,
And other things, including having a brother.
and yeah, including another kiddo,
Yeah, that's so tough. It's really like, all parents, I think, struggle with that time constraint. But especially, I think we struggle when our kids are what I call a little bit more or extra. Like, and Cody sounds like, he's more sensitive and emotional, so he's going to
mm-hmm.
need more from you. And it's hard when you've got the demands of life, conflicts there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really the case, And I did take Dr. Markham's Peaceful Parenting course, and I've really gained a lot from that. And I've just been trying to kind of practice some of those things, some of the special time, roughhousing, trying to make time for that. I recognize we aren't doing as good as we could be. The other piece that I think is a challenge is just the self-care, finding the time
Mm-hmm.
to take care of ourselves so that when we do show up, we've got the patience, the tolerance to sort of wrestle with what's going on. I think that might even be the biggest challenge, is how to find time for self-care.
For sure. So, what do you find? Like, give me some sort of real life examples of what the challenges with Cody looks like in terms of like his big needs, and how does that show up in your everyday life?
Well, in a practical sense, so I, head off to work first thing in the morning. We get up, get breakfast ready, usually get them off to school, head off to work, and then, by the time I come home, it's sort of these days sort of ships passing in the night, a handoff from the kiddos. My wife might go and study, but then we're kind of quickly into, dinner, bath time, bedtime routine. And so, weekends tend to be the only sort of opportunities to find that time, and striking a balance between, finding time for stuff with them and finding our own time for freedom and stress relief is a tricky balance. But I've noticed with him, things are so close to the surface. It doesn't take much to kind of just get, trigger him. And, yesterday, for example, we had some friends visit, and we all went down and got some ice cream. And, you'd think he would have been in just happier than could be. And he was initially, but then, the ice cream cone cracked. And that's all it took to kind of send him over the edge of like, I hate this ice cream. It's the worst, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So he has, what we call in peaceful parenting that full emotional backpack. And that it, as you said, like his feelings are close to the surface, and it doesn't take much to push him over into like, distress or a meltdown. So how do you respond in those times when when he might be upset about the crack in the ice cream cone?
Well, when we're at our best, we offer empathy first, and I get it, buddy. That's upsetting. Yeah, it's a bummer that thing cracked. I can see why you might be disappointed. Well, how can we figure this out? Kind of thing. When we're at our worst, it's like, oh my gosh, geez, what does it take? It doesn't take much to just whine, whine, whine. And so
Yeah.
there might be some shaming or blaming going on where we would really prefer to just offer empathy. And
Right.
so I think that's the real challenge I'm trying to strike these days. The balance is showing up in a way that, a compassionate way, instead of, I recognize that projecting blame and shame and criticism is not healthy. It's not good, but it's hard when there's just my fuse can be very short. I just don't have the bandwidth to kind of show up with that empathy that I want to.
So when we don't have the bandwidth, and I totally hear you on that, I think that, if we can even just find that split second of pause to reframe the situation, because, you're so not alone in that annoyance of like, oh my gosh, we're out for ice cream and supposed to be having a fun time here, and he's upset because his ice cream cone cracked. Like, for sure, that is, I think, a challenge a lot of parents have, that they feel like their kids aren't appreciating the good things, right? And we want them to not be glass half empty, and we want them to appreciate it. But it's pretty age appropriate for kids to not have perspective. And, a 6-year-old isn't going to have perspective because they really live in that moment of like, everything's great and then everything's terrible because my ice cream cone cracked. So I think if you can step out, if you can just give yourself that split second of a pause, even though your bandwidth is low, and really try to reframe it to see that, empathy is seeing it from somebody else's point of view. And also, I wonder if you ask yourself if there's maybe some fear underneath that of, what I just said, that he's going to be entitled, or that he's spoiled, that he's upset about this crack in his ice cream cone, and maybe even just bringing that to your awareness, that you may if you're like a lot of the parents I work with, move into this catastrophic thinking at that moment, because what does this mean that we're doing this nice thing and then he gets so disappointed at a little thing?
Yeah, I'd like to flesh that out a little bit more. I'm trying to track that, and it does kind of resonate. But if you could say a little bit more about that fear piece.
Sure. So why don't we just go back to that moment where, yesterday and his ice cream cone cracked. What were you feeling when you were responding to him?
Well, honestly, because it's such a reoccurring theme, I would say annoyance is probably
Yeah.
close to the surface.
Yeah. What was annoying about it?
Oh, the reoccurring sort of whining over things I would consider to be, not worth whining about.
What's underneath the not worth whining about? Like, what comes to your mind when you hear him whining about something that seems small to you?
I think that the need from my standpoint is something around, ease and, just kind of, yeah, ease is the word that kind of sticks out. Just having some kind of fun, easy, shared time with friends and family that doesn't involve the whining.
So if you
And
could put that into words in terms of like objection on your part to the whining, what would it be?
what I'm objecting to in this
Yeah.
reaction.
Like to my mind, a phrase comes to mind that's like, why can't he blah blah blah?
Hmm. Yeah, right. That would make sense to me. Why is it such a big deal? Why can't you just enjoy your ice cream
Hmm.
and figure this one out?
Yeah. And so what's the fear? What's the fear underneath that? If he can't, roll with this little problem, what does that mean in the bigger scope of things in your subconscious now that we're
Hmm.
bringing this up?
Right. I guess there's some fear around, not having the tools to cope.
Right. What if he's 16 and he's like, crying about a crack in his ice cream cone still?
Right. Yeah. Right. Like not having the tools to deal with upsets, I think is probably the underlying theme there, and
Hmm.
frustration around that. And then just kind of, annoyance around, nobody else is whining about look, so and so's ice cream just spilled and part of it hit the ground, but they're not complaining, kind of thing.
Right. Is there something like, something wrong? I'm saying wrong in quotes is like, there's something wrong with
Hmm.
my kid. Maybe that's the fear too.
Sure. I'd say there's probably some fear there around that. Yeah.
Hmm.
But I think ultimately it comes down to insecurity for myself, and maybe my wife would resonate with this too, just not knowing how to lean into that and help him through it in a way that, is compassionate and empathic instead of
Hmm.
avoiding the blame and the shame, because we just know that doesn't isn't helpful.
Right. Well, I think that when you look at your fears that are not they're not just common to you. Like this is really something I hear from a lot of parents that they're worried their kids are not growing up resilient, that they're not going to have the tools they need to be like successful in life and roll with the things that get thrown at them in life, and that maybe they're lacking comparing to their peers. I think that that's actually a fear that we're not doing it right. That there's something that we've done that made them this way. Does that resonate at all?
Yeah, yeah, it does. Right. That's kind of been the pattern is if he ends up, having these upsets, frequent upsets and reactions to things that I would consider not very, significant, then what is it that we've done to get it,
Hmm.
to make it that way? Sure,
So,
that definitely comes up.
so that's why it's a trigger for you, because it's like it's actually a trigger for you that you're doing it wrong. And we might call that a shame trigger. Like there's, something wrong with me that I haven't done this right, that my kid's not more prepared.
Yeah, I would say there's part of it that definitely that resonates in some ways for sure. I
Yeah.
think
And
I recognize. Go ahead, Sarah.
no, I was going to say, of course, thank you. That's not the only piece that's going on here,
Yeah.
but that's what makes us as parents get upset.
Hmm.
Is that our fear that that we're not doing a good job, or that there's something that we should have done that we haven't done that would make our child not get upset about the crack in the ice cream cone. So
Right.
I think just like pulling that out of those situations, and you said it's like a reoccurring pattern, that that sort of the whininess or upset at small things, we think it's about them, and it's just like it's annoying when they whine, and of course it is annoying when they whine, but it's really like more about what it touches in us is like this
Mm-hmm.
fear of like, why is my kid like this?
Hmm. Yeah, and I think there's elements there of finding time for self care, which in part is self empathy, giving myself the space and the support that I'm doing the best I can, and we're trying, and Right. I think if I'm not able to do that, sometimes I don't show up in a way that I really want to.
Well, and the thing is, you for the self care that you're talking about, and I love that you brought up the self compassion piece. You don't actually have to find time for that. You can just recognize when Cody's whining that you have to give yourself compassion in that moment, like in that moment. Like, this is really hard for me. Like, this brings up a lot of insecurities that I might have as a parent, that my child's behavior is a reflection on me and my parenting. And just in that moment, give yourself some love of, I may be the only one in this situation who's experiencing this right now, because your friend, as you said, the friends' kids weren't getting upset about little things, but you are 100% not the only one who has an extra sensitive child who experiences these things. And I'm telling you, it's not because of you. And that was the other place that I wanted to go. You have a kiddo who has really big feelings. And, right now, those feelings feel like an emergency to him because he hasn't learned yet that he can handle it when his ice cream cone cracks. And that's not because of something you or your wife haven't done. It's just because he doesn't have that perspective yet.
Right. No, I appreciate that. And I recognize that sometimes we need to kind of temper our expectations around what a 6-year-old's mind can understand. And where he can,
Mm-hmm.
I think I mentioned this to you previously, but earlier on in our time with him, my wife had much more time to kind of dig into age appropriate behaviors. And I would often lean on her and say, oh gosh, what's going on here? And she would maybe have some answers. And the free time just hasn't been there for as much of that sort of research these
Mm-hmm.
days. And so I think that's affected our perspective somewhat on what we can expect for him, how we would expect him to react in certain situations. So
Well, also you have an almost 2-year-old, and so a
right,
6-year-old is going to look giant compared to an almost 2-year-old. And you might expect that Skyler cries when his ice cream cone cracks because he's only 2, or
right,
maybe he's just a more easygoing kid and he wouldn't even care if his ice cream cone cracked, right?
right,
So
which is
it's
probably true.
yeah, yeah.
Right.
And Cody like feels things deeply, and these things are like really disappointing to him. And we have to remember that these are the experiences he needs to have to learn resilience. Whereas like you and your wife come up beside him, on your best moments, and come up beside him and like, oh my goodness, all the things you just said, your ice cream cone cracked. This is so disappointing. And then when you're calm and compassionate, that's how he learns this is not an emergency. He's just not there
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the word resilience. That one really lands as a way, that's the tool that we're really trying to help him build, is that resilience.
And resilience doesn't mean that you don't get upset. Resilience means that you get upset and then you recover. So
Hmm.
it's not the lack of upset that shows someone who's resilient. It's the fact that they can recover after a disappointment or a setback. And that's what really shows resilience.
Hmm.
And so you coming up alongside him and being there to co-regulate. Do you know what I mean by co-regulate?
Sort of help walk him through the process together.
Yeah, it's basically like your nervous system is calm and regulated, and then he can use your nervous system as an anchor to
Mm.
co-regulate with you. And that's how children, that process starts with infants. When we soothe a baby, when we're calm and we're soothing a baby, their nervous system uses some of our nervous system to regulate themselves.
Mm.
And that continues through, I mean, adults do that, right? Like we do that with each other when we're upset and we get like a loving hug from a partner, it helps us want to calm down or feel more calm. And so, Cody is literally borrowing the calm from your nervous system to help himself calm down when he gets upset.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's co-regulation.
Yeah. That's great. That's a good reminder that, I can experience that, like you say, even with adults, we kind of feed off of the energy that other people bring to the situation. And if it's a calming energy and presence, then that affects us as well.
Yeah, and if you walk into a room full of people that have just been arguing, your nervous system picks up on all of those cues of
Yeah.
danger in the room. And the opposite, walk into a party and everyone's laughing and happy, your nervous system picks up on that. Like, and this is all going on behind the scenes, and we're completely unaware of it and unconscious of it. But our nervous systems are always speaking to other people's nervous systems. And that's why in peaceful parenting, why we always start with that self-regulation piece. So, in
Hmm.
these moments when Cody gets upset about something, and he will because he's a sensitive kid, he has big feelings, really starting with that stop, drop, and breathe, that tool that you already are familiar with,
Hmm.
the stop, drop, and breathe, and then give yourself some compassion, addressing those fears, now that we've sort of brought them up to the surface, those fears of like, is there something wrong with him? Is there something wrong with us? Why is he acting this way when nobody else is acting this way?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you know what? This is okay. This is like, the learning process that he's going through. He is different than other kids. And I can guarantee you that anyone who takes parenting courses, comes on a parenting podcast, has a child that is more challenging than the average child. Because I tell you, there are people that I tell I'm a parenting coach, and I can tell they look at me and they're like, why would anyone need that? Because they have easy
Mm-hmm.
kids, and you sort of alluded to the fact that Skyler might be one of those more easygoing kids. And, Cody's a more intense kid. And so he's going to have bigger feelings. And those are exactly the right place for him to be right now.
Right. Yeah. And I think that the challenge, the ongoing challenge for us is the nature of how, because the upsets can be so frequent, and I would just judge it as whining. Those events can be so frequent that trying to just approach it every time, it kind of wears you down, or wears me down. When
100%.
it becomes so frequent, it's like I really want to. I can show up really great at times, but if it's so consistent and persistent, then it starts to wear me down, and the fuse gets a little shorter. And so I recognize I really need to work on that.
Well, whining is a kid who can't quite get to crying. And so that may be a helpful way for you to rephrase that. I did do a podcast episode about whining, and I will link to that in the show notes for people, because I go into whining a lot more. But whining is when you can't quite get to the tears. And so, you mentioned that emotional backpack, which is a concept developed by my mentor, Dr. Laura Markham. And it's basically a metaphor for our bodies, right? We carry around these emotions, tensions, stresses in our bodies when either we don't want to process them in real time, or we can't because it doesn't feel safe. And, so looking at that whining as also a sign of, yes, he is going to have more big feelings because of his temperament and his age. And what can we do to help him so it's maybe not quite so frequent and not quite so intense? So working on that backpack emptying. And I know you mentioned that you try to do special time, and that might, trying to do special time during the week might not be a reasonable expectation for your family, but you can try to do some laughter for backpack emptying, possibly even with both boys when you get that handoff, before dinner. Even spending 5 minutes trying to get everyone laughing could help, just be one of those things that just takes the edge off of Cody's
Yeah.
emotional backpack.
Yeah. And I would say that's definitely been a key, that, laughing, creating laughter, and he laughs pretty easily, which is good. We can get him laughing pretty quick. And so that's pretty, that's a good tool, a good strategy rather, for helping him deal with stuff. And then I've noticed, I have a hard time doing it every time, but I've noticed if I can lean in, like when he's having an upset and needing to unload his emotional backpack, instead of sort of pulling away and being irritated, if I can lean in and even just rub his back, or, give a hug or something like that, it's there's a shift, there's a
Yeah,
pretty evident shift. And so
totally.
just moving forward, just moving inward instead of pulling away is something I'm working on too, because I realize
Yeah.
it's a lot more helpful.
Well, and I love that you said lean in, because that's exactly how I describe it. Like when you have a kid who's whining, you make a note to yourself, okay, he's maybe having a hard time right now because he actually needs to cry because his backpack is full. How can I lean in to those feelings instead of trying to fix it? Like, okay, we'll get you a new ice cream cone, or trying to dismiss it, that it's not a big deal, but really trying to welcome the feelings by just leaning in, like, oh my goodness, it's not what you wanted. This ice cream is dripping now. And just kind of leaning in and hopefully getting to the tears so that he can actually cry and empty that emotional backpack. I love that you're aware of that.
Yeah, I appreciate the idea of recognizing that the tears are a healthy thing, because that's taken me a while just to make that adjustment. That, like, right, they need to get to that place. This is a healthy process for them to go through, and they need to unload their emotional backpack. And
Mm-hmm.
one thing we've worked on a little bit with Cody, and he's responded, okay, is kind of build that emotional vocabulary. I think I mentioned to you, I've practiced and learned a lot about nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg's model, and there's so much benefit there, I think, in just everyday life with all sorts of things. But trying to build that, emotional vocabulary, so you can. That's that idea, I think, of name it to tame it kind of thing, right? You can
Mm-hmm.
as soon as you connect to that feeling and it really resonates, like you've identified the feeling and maybe even the need underneath it, there's just sort of a, some space for it to heal or for compassion or whatever to kind of be there. Whereas if you just can't figure that out, it just gets more frustrating. At least
Yeah.
that's been my experience. So trying to help build that vocabulary in myself, even, I mean, that's a process I'm still going through. What
Mm-hmm.
does this feeling, what is the word for it?
Yeah.
So we've been working on that. Sometimes, we've got these little cards that we use, and sometimes we'll try to make a game of it and play with the cards, and it works to some extent. But there's times where we just want to take the cards and throw them across the room. I hate this game. But so it has to be strategic.
And I think 6-year-olds are maybe getting to the age where, and maybe it works well for Cody and that's great, but some 6-year-olds might feel insulted if you're trying to say like, you feel really sad right now, or, and because they're getting, more awareness of their feelings. And so just if anyone who's listening, or if you notice that he's not responding well to that, it could be that the labeling feels a little bit babyish, maybe. I'm not sure. But
Yeah,
that's just something to keep in mind.
there's a nuance or something to that process of trying to
Yeah.
make it fun and a good game to play.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I think, the idea we were speaking of resilience a few minutes ago, and I think that welcoming those feelings and just, not being afraid of them, and not being trying to fix it and not trying to dismiss it, those are all that's really how we help kids be resilient, when we're just willing to be with them in their feelings. And that's what empathy is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just being with them in their feelings.
For sure, I would say that's probably my biggest challenge these days, and it's not just with kids, but in life in general, showing up when, it's like, I don't know, this is a bit off topic, but just there's so much to occupy our brain space, our energy, our time these days. And so trying to strike a balance with that and find time for self-care to be able to show up in the way we want to, for me
Hmm.
is just a wrestle with that.
It is. It's tough. And as a culture, we're a culture that is not good with emotion. Like we
Right.
do. There's so much, and, just even looking at our like busy lifestyles where there's no room for feelings, and that the expectations that we can just like move from one thing to another without stopping to feel and process. And we were all raised, I think, by, generations of parents who were wanting to either be dismissive or the fixing it, right? It's a pretty new thing, I think, to be
Right.
aware of feelings.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And even especially for us guys, maybe it's a thing that we're maybe a little bit outside of our box or whatever, or is
Yeah.
understanding and tuning into those feelings. So,
The work you're doing with Cody is so important. I was reading this book that you might find interesting. It's by Peggy Orenstein. It's called Boys and Sex. And it's not about sex as much as it's about a culture of toxic masculinity. And she interviewed 100 young men and boys for this book. And all of them said, well, not all of them said their dads were great, but the ones who said, like, I'm really close to my dad and we did a lot together and he was really involved in my childhood, and he never talked to me about feelings. And that sent the message to me that it wasn't that I shouldn't talk about feelings. And these boys, all of them said, the only people I can talk to about feelings are my girlfriends or my mom. And I
mm-hmm.
just thought that,
Yeah.
that's sort of a missing piece, I think, sometimes that you're doing. That's my point, is that you're doing it, like talking to Cody about feelings. Because I think a lot of parents and dads especially can be really involved and really spend a lot of time with their kids. But if they don't talk about feelings, they're still sending the message that feelings are an emergency.
Right. Right. Yeah. And, to be honest, it's partially for my own benefit too. I need to figure this stuff out. And if we can do it together, then we're both better off.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, the next time that Cody starts to feel, that he's upset about something that's, quote, unreasonable, one of those little problems, which, by the way, those are the training wheels of emotional resilience. When you're 6, you should be upset about things like your ice cream cone getting a crack in it, because as he gets older, his problems are going to get bigger. And it's like these being upset and practicing being resilient and welcoming your feelings about little things that will grow, and then that'll shape him for as he gets older, and his challenges in life become bigger and more serious until he's a grown up with grown up life challenges. So, that's another thing I think for parents to keep in mind, like kids who cry because, they can't watch another show, or they, you cut the muffin wrong or whatever. It's totally appropriate for them to have those upsets when they're little, because that's how they're learning.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective as thinking of it as like, building blocks that we get through this, we're better suited for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And that, so
Hmm.
yeah, that's good perspective.
Yeah, like as grown-ups, we have to deal with bigger, sort of more real-world problems. But if we don't have the experience of experiencing hardship and getting through it, we get thrown by those bigger problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when he's upset, remind yourself this is appropriate. Even if other 6 year olds aren't upset about something like this, he's extra sensitive and he has big feelings. It's appropriate for him to be upset about these things. And it doesn't mean that I'm doing it wrong or that, he's going to not be equipped in life to be successful. Just try and stay in that moment, because whenever we go to that catastrophic thinking or those fears, it actually takes us out of the moment of the ice cream cone. So really trying to like give yourself some compassion, even like talk to yourself like, Bob, this doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. He's just having a hard time right now, and this is age appropriate and I can handle this. So just talking to yourself in the moment to sort of keep yourself there in that moment, and then leaning in, as you said.
Yeah. I think that one of my takeaways is sort of those little mantras, sort of like you've mentioned, this is age appropriate. He's unloading his emotional backpack. I think that's my kind of takeaway, is being able to pull those mantras up in the moment and just saying to myself to give me a little bit of space to react.
Yeah, and also if you're out in public, that's another added dimension, right? Or another layer is like, what do other people thinking? What are other people thinking of me? And that can be really tricky to parent in public. And so I find it helpful to just remind myself, or at least when my kids were little, like my loyalty is to my child, right?
Mm-hmm.
And trying to tell myself that I know that I'm doing the right thing by my child, even if other people might be judging, because maybe they
Mm-hmm.
are or maybe they're
Yeah.
not. I actually have a story from a woman I know she was leaving the park, and she was with her like 5 year old and her 3 year old, and her 3 year old was in the wagon, and he was like throwing things out of the wagon, having a meltdown as they were trying to leave the park. And she just kept calmly stopping and picking the things up and putting them back in the wagon. And he's having this giant meltdown. And she saw this dad staring at her from across the park, and she just went into this like shame place, and she was like, oh my God, like he probably
Mm-hmm.
thinks I'm like awful mother. And just then he called out, you're doing a great job.
Right.
And I just love that she assumed that she was being judged, but actually this person, and thank goodness he said something, because it's so helpful to hear that people aren't always thinking negatively of us when our kids are having a hard time in public.
Right. No, that's great. And I've appreciated this. This for me has been reassuring that, like you mentioned, I'm not alone and we're doing okay and trying. And that's what matters. So anyway, I appreciate the time.
Oh, you're so welcome. And I think just, for the next time we talk, these in the moment strategies that we've talked about, and also let's think of how we can increase the laughter, just even 5 minutes. I know you and your partner are both really busy, but maybe 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes in between, daycare and dinner, and try and get some more laughter going. It's great that Cody is easy to get laughing. And also looking for what I call those micro moments of connection throughout the day, because it can be hard when you have a working family schedule, little kids. Of course, the gold standard is in peaceful parenting, a special time every day. That's just not realistic for some families. So if you can just do special time on the weekends, do special time on the weekends and have it be a little bit longer. And then during the week when you're, busy and you've got, Skyler around, just look for those like little micro moments of connection that you can bring, which by that I mean like a big smile when you catch Cody's eye across the dinner table, or I missed you when you were at school today, or these little tiny things that you can just inject into the day. And I think that might make you feel like you're keeping that connection going even through this busyness,
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate that.
and leaning into the tears whenever possible.
Right. Right.
I
Right.
have a client from a few years ago who her child was very hard to get him to cry. He often would just get angry instead of crying. And one day he fell off his bike, and she reported to me that he cried and cried and cried when he fell off his bike, and that he was like a different kid for a couple of days because he'd really emptied that emotional backpack by those tears over his falling off his bike. And she said, "Can I just push him off his bike every couple of days?"
Right.
But
Yeah.
it just really shows you that those tears are so necessary to like clear out all that backlog of big feelings. And a kid who's sensitive is going to have a bigger backlog of big feelings than a kid who's more easygoing.
Yeah. I think for all of us, I'm, I can remember like it's been years, but the last time I had a good hard cry and how sort of it flushed, felt like it
Yeah.
flushed my system. And,
Oh,
I should probably do that more often
I was
myself.
going to say, Bob, I'm going to jump on you now and get you to
Yeah.
try and have a good cry maybe this weekend because, we all need to have to do that backpack emptying. And that's honestly, you can do all the self care in the world, like with, taking time for yourself or extra sleep or whatever. But a big piece of that is getting your own emotional backpack emptied. I will sometimes put on like a sad YouTube video if I feel like I need to cry. One of my favorite ones is called Eric and Petey. It's like it's a rescue dog video. I'll link to it in the
Okay.
show notes and I'll send it to you. But every time I watch that, I just bawl my eyes out. And so just even, we don't have to cry about the things that are in our emotional backpack. It doesn't matter. We can cry
Yeah.
about a sad movie or a YouTube video, or if we fall off our bike, we just need to cry. So I would recommend as part of your self-care to try and get some tears flowing.
Right on. I appreciate that reminder. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. And I think as a boy, you were probably told not to cry.
Right. Yeah. It's pretty ingrained in our culture.
It totally is. And boys, even today with sensitive parents, even boys today get the message that they shouldn't cry.
Yeah, I appreciate that reminder because I just even that kind of a mantra, like it's crying is a good thing or it's healthy to
Mm-hmm.
cry, I think is good for me to just be thinking about and kind of be ready to, you know, apply when necessary.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So watch a sad movie this weekend or the sad YouTube video.
I'll look up Eric and Petey.
Yeah, it's such a good one. Even if you're not a dog person, it's one of those like humanity videos. And just don't think if there's anything else I want you to work on before we talk.
Oh gosh,
Um,
Sarah, you've already given me a lot here.
yeah, just to reinforce what we've talked about. If there's anything specific, so just leaning into the tears, getting some laughter, staying in the moment, and really recognizing how hard it is when those fears come up, but just trying to stay in the moment and remind yourself that it's a-okay what Cody's going through. And this is what he needs to do to develop that resilience. And be gentle with yourself. You don't have to be perfect. This is a long game, right? This is not like the championship game where if you miss the goal, it's all over. Like this is a long game that we just keep working and we keep working.
Right. Well, I think even just participating in something like this where I can get, constructive feedback and reassurance that, I'm not alone and that kind of stuff,
You're so
reading,
not alone.
continuing the peaceful parenting journey and just kind of reading up on tips is always, I just find just having that kind of constant, reminder of things is also very beneficial because otherwise if I don't, pay attention to that kind of stuff on a regular basis, then it starts to slip and,
Yeah.
then it's easier to have a short fuse.
And what I hear from a lot of parents is like, after we talked, the next 2 or 3 weeks we were really great with the tools that you gave us and the strategies, and then we kind of petered off, and
Right.
things had gotten so much better, and then they got bad again. So that is exactly right. That we have to stay intentional and keep working on the things that get us to a better place. Keep doing the things when we know that they work.
Right. For me, when I've shown up at my very best, I would just share that I've a couple times in my life I've done these 10-day silent meditations, it's Vipassana meditation thing, and coming out of that and just having this sort of balance and groundedness, and almost like it's to me the image is like a glass of sand kind of settling, or a glass of water with sand and it kind of just settling, and by the end of it, it's like there's clarity and there's presence and calmness, and I've always felt like that state of mind is when I can show up the best and move through the world the best. So practicing meditation more, I know for me is something I probably should be doing more of. And
I've been
as
trying
a
to do that.
simple,
So it's really hard to
yeah,
take time when it feels like you're not doing anything, when you have so much to do.
right. Well, that's the thing these days. I mean, not to get us down the rabbit hole, but just having so much stuff to occupy our brain space, and it just keeps getting piled on. It feels like every day. So trying to find just a few minutes even to meditate and settle, it can be a real challenge, or maybe even a perceived challenge. Maybe
Yeah.
we just make it harder than it needs to be. But that's
Yeah.
a good practice for me.
It is good. And even just a few minutes, I imagine, makes a difference.
It does.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Bob. And we will talk in a few weeks. And I can't wait to hear how things are or what's still challenging. And we'll try and tweak that.
Wonderful. Yeah, I really appreciate the time, Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, Bob. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me back.
All right. So it's been a couple of weeks since we last spoke. Can you give us an update on how things have been for you and Cody and Carrie?
Well, there's a few takeaways from our conversation that my wife and I tried to focus on. One was trying to kind of really be okay with the upsets and recognize them as normal behaviors and things that need to happen and get that, flush out the feelings. The self-care and trying to do a little bit more of that so we show up in a way that we really want to show up. I did find a small opportunity, a small window to cry. I will say
Good.
it wasn't, the total flush that I maybe would have hoped for, but I did find a little window there.
Well, maybe you can keep trying to find those because I think it is really it should be a part of our self care, right? That maintenance of helping ourselves regularly empty our backpacks.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, it helps. Just getting that little bit of release always helps. The micro moments thing I was focusing on more from the standpoint of trying to kind of find things I could praise him for throughout the day, like, putting clothes away or doing putting your dishes back, or things that I maybe wouldn't have just acknowledged in the past, or just trying to be more aware of and more tuned into finding little ways to praise him throughout the day, and offering more love and support.
Did you find that when you shifted that your sort of idea of the upset being normal, did that change how you and Carrie or how you were showing up for Cody?
It did a little bit. I think we both sort of just try to give it a little more space, a little more awareness that it's a process and it's part of the process, and it does help. It all kind of depends on how the mental capacity we have at any given time. Both of us have sort of walked away a couple times too, just because we know the words that are going to come out aren't going to be helpful. So we'll just try to take that approach and just come back when we can and let it go for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying. I definitely think we're putting more effort into that.
Well, I mean, that's all you can do sometimes is just keep trying. Normalizing that upset is something you can still keep working on. It's definitely like a project that will continue.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a process for sure.
Yeah. Did you notice anything, sort of about the stories you were telling yourself when you tried to do that, when you were trying to, because I remember last time we talked about sort of that fear that maybe you weren't doing it right or that he wasn't developing properly. Did you notice any of that coming up and were you able to talk to yourself about that?
I think the internal dialogue for me is a lot of self-criticism and blame or shaming around the should thinking. I'm shoulding myself a lot. I shouldn't be taking this personally. I should be able to, react differently. There's definitely a lot of that kind of stuff going on. So when I do react or get triggered, I just question my own capacity. Why does this keep happening? What do I need to do to, strike a better balance there? So there's a lot of that thinking going on, because I do see that, for him, it's enough of a pattern that I can tell, it's become a normal thing. I can recognize it as a normal part of this development process. But for I think it's my own reactions that I get frustrated with now.
Do you think maybe you could give yourself a little bit more compassion?
I need to, yes. Yeah. That's definitely a challenge of mine for sure.
So what do you need language around that? Do you need something to remind you? Like if you know it's a challenge and you know that you quote should, I know we're trying to stay away from the shoulds, but if you know you need more compassion for yourself in those moments, what stops you from giving it to yourself?
That's a good question. I suppose just an ingrained pattern that I'm used to. So I need to disrupt the pattern a little bit, maybe find a new way. Or, I think I mentioned too, just taking a break and giving myself a little bit of space so I don't say anything or do anything I regret. So I've tried that, and that works. Taking some breaths, just stepping away for a minute is something I've tried and will continue to do. That's a good strategy for me. So otherwise,
Good.
I don't know. I mean, it's just a kind of an ingrained pattern. I think that just need to break.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any sense of how you might be able to do that? Maybe we could come up with some sort of a cue word or a mantra for yourself
Mantras are
when
great. Yeah, let's try that.
okay. So have you had anything that's happened in the last couple of weeks that comes to mind where you realize you look back and you think, oh gee, I should have given myself some more compassion when things were hard. Do you have a scenario that comes to mind when something was difficult with Cody?
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking of yesterday at the Earth Day fair we went to here in town. He was really having a hard time moving through. There was all these activities at the different booths, and every time we would come to a new one, he seemed to, um, have an outburst. This is stupid. I hate this. These are dumb exercises, that kind of thing. And the feeling was some, I guess, embarrassment, and you don't want the people that are putting on these booths to feel bad, and so my wife just pulled him away, and we ended up going and sitting in this off to the side. And those are the moments I don't know exactly how to react really,
Mm-hmm.
because there's something going on. I don't know if it's like he has this expectation around he should be performing he needs to do these activities. There's an expectation he puts some pressure on himself for. I'm not sure, but we both got a little frustrated with him there because of the negative the words and the negative reactions to people that were just trying to provide a fun experience.
Right. Well, I think that's a moment for compassion. I recalled in my Facebook group the other day, this mom was really disappointed because she'd taken her daughter to a parade that she thought was going to be really fun, and it turned out that the daughter really did not enjoy the parade, and it was just really disappointing because the mom had thought, here I am planning this fun activity, and so I wonder if there was an element of that for you, if you and your wife thought, oh, this is going to be really fun for Cody, and then he just didn't like it. And so maybe just like giving yourself some love, like, oh, I'm disappointed that I tried to do this fun thing for my kid and he's not appreciating it.
Right, just acknowledging that we were disappointed ourselves, right?
Yeah. I
Yeah,
wonder if he gets overwhelmed.
that could be, yeah, with the amount, the number of people and the number of activities and things.
Well, and when we talked a couple weeks ago, it was the example of going out for ice cream with friends. Have you noticed that he gets overwhelmed when there's a lot of commotion or people or even
Yeah,
just the
yep,
excitement?
yep, for sure. That's been the case, but then there's situations where, excuse me, we'll just be. I don't know if I brought this up last time or not, but just going on a bike ride and seems really excited about where we're headed, and then he takes one turn that's like not the way we're supposed to be going. So we say, no, Cody, we're going this way, and all of a sudden he'll lose it. It's like, fine, I'm going home, or something like that. And it's like, wow, that turned really quickly, and it was just us. It's just my wife and I and Skyler and Cody together on a bike ride. So it wasn't like there was a lot of people. It wasn't a lot of pressure. It was just one wrong turn, and all of a sudden it was a huge deal. So
That sounds like he's probably embarrassed, but he feels like he made a mistake. And, we talked about how he's so sensitive and that the shame, sensitive kids get really easily shame triggered. Even when you point out something really innocuous like, oh no, we're going this way, not that way, they can feel this sense of like, oh, I did the wrong thing. And now they're, pointing it out and I'm never going to feel better. And it's that, those big feelings again that we're talking about.
and I did ask one time, I said, is it, do you, feel like you're not loved a lot sometimes? I can't remember exactly what I said, but, the answer was yes. It kind of came back to like getting scolded for things that he does and, feeling like that translates into that, you don't love me or something like
Mm-hmm.
that.
Did we talk about empathic limits last time? Like, I know this is just a check in, but I think it's important for anyone who has a sensitive kid and for you when they do get upset about things like turning the wrong way and, I'm the worst kid ever. We need to correct sensitive kids in a way that they know that we still think they're good people. So it might look like, oh, Cody, we forgot to tell you the way to go. It's actually this way, not that way. So that little, like, we forgot to tell you the way to go is saying, like, I still think you're a good person. You didn't mess up the whole day or whatever. His sensitivity is going to make him jump to that. Or say, he spills something. You might say, oh, I don't think you saw that glass of milk was right by your elbow. Let's grab a towel and clean it up. Or if he, I'm trying to think of examples. If he accidentally or maybe even on purpose, pushes his brother over. You might be emotionally generous and give him the benefit of the doubt. I don't think you knew your brother was standing right there. Or I wonder if you didn't know what was going to happen when you bumped into him. So you're always starting with this generous place, benefit of the doubt, assuming positive intent. And basically that's, it's not exactly a limit, but it's like leading with empathy so that Cody knows that you don't think that he's a bad person, because that's where the shame comes in. Like even if something simple like, hey, we're not going that way, because he's so sensitive, he hears in that like an implicit criticism.
Yeah, no, that's great, Sarah. I that really lands with me. That whole concept and what you're saying resonates. I especially, like the bike example, when you say, we forgot to tell you the right way, buddy. That puts the responsibility on us and not him. It's like, oh shoot, our bad.
Yeah.
That one's on us. So I appreciate that. I think that's definitely an area for us to work on, because there are a lot of moments throughout the day, especially with little brother, of rough housing, or just the reaction is often like, oh Cody, no, careful, you're gonna kick him, or whatever. It's sort of like always it probably just comes across as direct criticism all the time, or blaming or something like that.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
yes, that's a great, I appreciate that. Good stuff to work on.
And because he's only 6 and he's still got, big feelings and low impulse control, I think you don't have to worry about this like forever. You're going to have to be so careful about how you correct him. But just right now, he's in this like pretty intense phase.
Yes, and it probably is that repetitive calling him out on things, or trying to manage the situation so much that he just feels like he can't do anything right sometimes, or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that when you and his mom are working more, as you have been, on normalizing the upset and not getting so frustrated and annoyed at little things like the ice cream cone cracked, and being more generous with yourself and more compassionate with yourself so that you have more to give him, he's going to feel less and less like he's the kid who is always doing something wrong.
Yeah, yeah. That's good feedback. I'm glad we hit on that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to look into where can I sort of dig into more of this empathic limits idea.
I will send you a couple resources I have about it, and for anyone who's listening, we'll put them in the show notes. I've written a couple of posts that include that, so we'll put them in the show notes and I'll send them to you. So was there anything else that you wanted to update me on or get any more clarification on?
I don't think so. The notes I made for myself here, one of them was just that the laughter and the play is something that we have focused more on, and there's definitely, we realize the change there. You can see that he's enjoys it, and it helps turn situations around more. So we had been doing it before, but maybe not as frequent. So we're trying to get more of that into the day and throughout the
Good.
day.
Yeah, we had talked about a laughter log of trying to help him regularly empty his backpack and keep it a little bit emptier. Have you noticed that that's made him a little less reactive?
Yeah, it does help kind of regulate things, maybe even things out throughout the day, get a little more space to when things do come up that are upsetting. Maybe they won't be quite as upsetting.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That's been helpful.
When the backpack's not as full, there's a little bit more flexibility there.
Yeah, no, this is great. I've appreciated just being able to chat with you and take some notes and, try to work on some stuff.
Yeah.
There's always more.
Bob, when you have an intense kid, it's not like, a few weeks is going to turn everything around and, life is going to be there on the sunny side of the street. When you have an intense kid, life is more challenging and harder. And it's more of developing your practice, taking care of yourself, looking at the long game that you're like in this intense period, and really trying to see the big picture.
Yeah, it's a process. So yeah, I've appreciated it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Let me know how the empathic limit approach goes, and I'll send you some resources about that.
Yeah, that's great. That's good. Something for me to dig into.
All right, good. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Sarah. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. I hope you found this conversation insightful and exactly what you needed in this moment. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Remember that I'm rooting for you. I see you out there showing up for your kids and doing the best you can. Sending hugs over the airwaves today. Hang in there. You've got this.